Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And today we're incredibly lucky to be joined by the fantastic Sofia Vassilieva, who is currently starring in the movie The Little Things. And I wanted to start by asking about the audition process for the film and kind of in the journey of going into audition for a movie like this, particularly because it is such an emotionally harrowing character that you're stepping into, what that process looked like in terms of the preparation that you wanted to do walking into the room, because at the same time, you didn't have the full details of your character or the movie as a whole yet at that point, just an inkling of what it was going to be.
It was actually a very unique and lovely experience. I had just finished shooting Looking for Alaska, and I was on a trip with my family. And I got sent aside, and I was like, I'm not in LA. And that very quickly became, can we push it? Can I go in when I get back? And it was like, yeah, there's a little bit of wiggle room. I went into audition for the first time for it when I got back to LA, and then that was sort of it. And I flew to New York for my best friend's bachelorette weekend and actually got another job. And I got a phone call saying, come in and meet with John Lee Hancock. But it would be the first day of shooting on another project. And it became sort of do I gamble on myself and say no to this other job and go in for this audition? Or do I say, just go off of my tape? And I ended up saying no to the other job to go in and meet John Lee. And then Mark Johnson was there, who I worked with years ago on My Sister's Keeper, which was I knew he was producing, but I didn't think that he'd be there. And I walk into the room and I immediately was warm and happy. But the fun little caveat to this whole story is I'm sitting in this waiting room with a couple other girls who are all auditioning for the same part. And one girl walks in and we hear her singing. And I am terrified, brutally terrified of singing in public. And the girl next to me goes, did you know we had to sing? And I was like, nope, did not know. And the girl is singing, If You Want to Be My Lover, Spice Girls. And I was like, and there's the song that I would go to. So I went into the hallway and I was like, Sophia, think quick. I'm shaking at this point. And I Live Like You're Dying by Tim McGraw, which definitely I later Googled was not written in the 90s. It was written in the 2000s, or at least released in the 2000s. So I walk in and I'm like, hi, I heard we had to sing. And they're like, that's later. And I was like, great, I'll just freak out until then. And we did all the sides and the material, and John Lee's so gentle. And so it was such I really love working when it feels gentle. And you sort of arrive at things without ever really feeling like you're muscling anything. And so we played with material and we got to singing, and I was queued it up on my phone, which also didn't exist in the 90s. I was like, can I do it? And they were like, yeah, it's fine. And then I did the driving sequence, and I just broke down in the middle of it, which was great for this character, but it was because I was so terrified of the whole experience. And I remember leaving the room and skipping down the street. I was just happy. I was just so happy. I conquered my fear, which was the greatest thing in the world. Had a phenomenal working experience with the scenes, and I got sealed for it. It's one of those where they had to move the appointment. I literally got off of a plane and went straight to this to meet. So it was a lot of magic and a lot of believing in yourself and saying, no, I'm gonna take my shot here, to quote Hamilton, sort of.
That's such a
that was a very long explanation.
No, it was wonderful though, and such an incredible journey to go on. And that's so fascinating that you're saying that the scene that you auditioned with was actually the car driving scene, because even just in watching the film, I was actually very curious about the way in which that came together performance-wise, because you have this moment where, you know, there's such a centralized focus. The camera's really just following your character's perspective, what they're going through. You know, there's a high level of anxiety and adrenaline as she's kind of on the run from someone who's clearly chasing her. And at the same time, that's also your opportunity to make really specific character choices and to try and convey that at the same time as not really having dialogue to rely on, because you're the only person in the scene. So I was really fascinated in how you constructed your performance in that sequence.
I really love moments where characters don't talk, because I think that there is so much in there. There's so much freedom. There's so much choice. What I really loved about Tina is that she's very much like what society has sort of allowed for women or accepted women as being, right? She's not a victim. She's in a situation that anyone could find themselves in. And she thinks very quick on her feet. She makes very smart choices, and she finds her way out. And so that's something that, like, those are stories we're telling now. And so to have this like character who's in the 90s, and we see the strength of will, was really exciting for me, because it sort of felt like we were telling that. I really like grounding elements. Like I really for me, I always like taking in space. So it's literally like the car and the wheel and the driving. And I was actually driving, and the music was actually playing, though they played it much quieter than I would have liked. But that all, just the commitment to the song at the beginning and enjoying that experience. And also, like, it's the 90s. She's like a Madonna girl. Like she's this girl's girl. And when I went in for my first wardrobe fitting, actually, we really sort of started building her, and it was such an exciting experience to be like, okay, this is who you are. And so I think for that, and for the lack of dialogue, it was the surrender to the car and the song and the cold and the elements and the sort of bushy desert, in the dark, and letting all of that live, and playing and not getting ahead of myself, not telling the beginning at the end at the beginning.
Right, because we were talking just before about how that was originally written in the middle of the script, and then when you watched the film just last night, you suddenly discovered that it was the opener to it all.
That was trippy. I was like, oh, okay. And then I like went back and I like looked at the script and I was like, okay, so what was here, and where did it move, and how did this happen? Because like the older I've become, the longer I've been in this industry, the more fascinated I am about like the actual art of cinema and storytelling, and how you can change it in the edits, and how lighting and cinematography and everything really comes together from conception, from script to actual like theater land, once we return to theaters. But it was really exciting, because it didn't change the story, but it changed a way of viewing it, and it was really exciting, because it is such a character of like, you have to identify with her, you have to find her, you have to, but you find her relatable, you like her, and all of a sudden you go through this experience and you care and then you launch into figuring out who and what, and that to me, I think was really exciting, because it's the audience's first sort of foray into caring about this movie and caring about this character and understanding why the care that is in it. So that was really special. Very exciting.
Yes. Well, to your point just now of like the who, the what, and the why, which are like all of those questions that get completely drummed up in that opening sequence with her. I was interested in whether you found yourself combing through the script and looking at a lot of the details they give of the other victims, you know, who don't manage to escape, and just kind of little details of what they perhaps went through to just really understand what the stakes are and what the situation was that she was in, or whether that wasn't at all useful because she, you know, like she does kind of make it out on the other side very quickly in the opening sequence. It's not a spoiler. And so she obviously doesn't go through the same experience as these other girls.
Well, I think it's always the fear of the unknown that's the most terrifying. And it's also like we never really figure it out either, right? It's the storytelling is what makes us think that, oh, this is this and this is that, and this is how the story goes, and this is how it'll be, right? That's the art of the story of this piece. But for me, yeah, I looked and I you know, I sort of went down that avenue a little bit, but I realized that it really is the fear of not knowing, the complete fear of like I think the imagination is always so much worse. And I'm really, really good at being like a hypochondriac who like can think of the worst situation for everything. Like I'm very good at that in life. So a lot of it was just allowing for the imagination to exist and sort of not being held to the other victims, because it could have nothing to do with it in a way, right? And in that moment, there's no knowledge of anything. But what was interesting that you just reminded me is in those moments that are completely terrifying, the question really often is like, what do you do? You know, like, what do you do? You know, and there's like the breath, and then there's prayer, and then there's seeking solutions, and to sort of explore all those little things. Oh, look, little things. Was really exciting because I remember when we were shooting and I was like crouched in the bushes before this truck sort of comes and the one way out appears. It was breath and prayer and that was an interesting discovery that happened.
And then later on in the film, when she comes into the police station and is there to try and give any detail that she can, or, you know, to kind of potentially be an eyewitness, even though she didn't see his face. I thought it was really fascinating that she comes alone, that there's nobody with her at that point. There's no parents, no family, no friends with her, that it is just this solo endeavor that she's going on. And so I wanted to ask you about when you read that in the script and when that was a detail that you realized was part of this character's journey, what that really told you about her life, her relationships with other, or even just how she wanted to handle and process this in her own way, perhaps.
That was surprising. Obviously a certain amount of time later, when it was sort of when those two sequences were closer together, it felt like, you know, a couple of days, but which now it could be longer, but because she was going somewhere that seemed far, right? Like she was road tripping, she was going somewhere. This wasn't like a casual point A to point B move. It felt very much like, and I think it was beautifully written, that this is someone who is maybe moving to a new city, has all these hopes and dreams, and then has this experience and does arrive in this place completely altered as a human being, with the rose-colored glasses off and isolated because she might not know anyone or have anyone. And so it informed me more about the experience and being alone. I think a lot of people in traumatic experiences feel very alone, and then to be very alone was really informative and at the same time courageous. So like, to me, she's someone who's a traveler, who wants to be a traveler, who looks at the world and is excited by it and wants to go somewhere and see something and travel outside. You know, it's like that's the joie de vivre of her, and she's engaged in everything. And so I thought it was really heartbreaking and compelling that she came alone, because there is, and I mentioned this before, like she's a very strong, smart, like figure it out woman. That there was like a almost like a stoic stature about her in that, and like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna get I'm gonna point A, point B, like this is how I'm gonna handle, and I'm gonna process, and I'm gonna handle, and I'm gonna process. And the solitude of it, I think it's a nice, it can be made into a commentary of like, when awful things happen, we do feel alone, and that is, you know, how whether she was alone by choice or circumstance, which was sort of what I thought and went with. But yeah, I thought it was a more interesting choice.
Yeah. Well, to that point of her being very much a do-it-yourself woman, and the way that she wants to kind of take some action, and that's part of why she's there in the station at that point. There's such an interesting emotional journey that suddenly flips for her, because she's there trying to identify someone. And then by the time that she leaves, it's very clear that she can't really be of any help in this case, and that she can't actually do anything to resolve what she's been through and to help stop this. So her ability to take action is completely depleted in a really, really short second. So how did you want to kind of transfer that journey of just that loss of power that she then has in that moment into her as a character?
What's also really devastating is that there's no closure for her. And a lot of, you know, she is a victim in a way, but I don't want to call her a victim. I don't think like this experience happened, but she made out, and victim is just such a hard word. But she made out, but there's so many people who don't have closure, right? We, as people go through life and we experience all these things, some completely minor that we don't realize leave an impact on us till later, some completely major that shift the course of our lives and who we are. And then how do we fight for the parts of us that we loved, which I think is sort of like, if we were to continue with her, like I just imagined her in bed alone for a couple days. Like that was sort of like noises, trying to stay engaged, not sleeping. And so like, well, she has no closure. There is no and I guess the thing that showed up for me in filming was that it was like the letdown of it. Like I came to try to do this thing and I wasn't able to help. And in helping, you save people, right? That like the hope is that may this never happen to anyone else. And I think that the translation of that is just from like, it's always so hard, right? Because you have a script and you have these thoughts and you do this work, and then you show up and you're like, okay, well, how do I like, and the hard thing is there aren't really like, that's the beauty of process, right? Is it's evasive in a way. And so I think it was living in those circumstances with the courage and the maybe I'll sleep tonight and maybe I can help someone, and then the loss of it, and it happens so quickly, and there is this part of like, I don't really understand what just happened, because she's not coming in here to, right? Like the fact that the problem is that she sees him, and then she sees him again, and she kind of becomes like not like usable information. And so it's the like, wait, what happened? I didn't do anything wrong. Did I do something wrong? And that's always interesting to me. And that's sort of how that played. It was abrupt, but like the questions almost multiplied in that moment of like, so that was sort of it was like setting up the stakes for her and the experience for her, and then allowing the course of the scene to happen and what everyone else brought to it. And then all the questions that were left. I think it's always more interesting when we leave with more questions than we came in with.
I totally agree. And to that point as well of, you have the scripts and you come up with all these ideas for the character. And then there's also that journey of discovery once you're there kind of thinking about it on set and, particularly with the rest of the cast, and you were talking earlier about a lot of the ideas of her backstory and, some of those details we see on screen, some of them are kind of self-constructed ideas of who this woman is. How far in the journey of creating her backstory and putting together all those details did you want to go on your own, and how much was about having conversations with John Lee Hancock and kind of like thinking about like what his idea was to kind of marinate on both of these versions of this character to really think about all the different layers of who she could be?
It's funny because I said this earlier, he's so gentle, and I think that's what makes a remarkable director, is when you can't quite separate where your ideas ended and his began. I think that it was, even from walking into wardrobe and sort of seeing what they had been thinking of for her, and that like even going in and having those conversations, like it just starts, and this was such a gentle experience of being excited and open in the room and being terrified, and then, because I'm singing obviously, and then going in and having wardrobe and everyone was so excited to have me there, which is always so lovely about a set. I always admire sets where that's the feeling about everyone. That it was bits and pieces of like, oh, okay, here's like the like Madonna like body top with the like, the little Madonna white leotard vibe. Okay, here's something about her. Okay, well, how do scrunchies feel? Oh, okay, here she's going. And then the like schnoogly oversized sweater that she's in, and then there's that silly line of like, oh, get her a magazine, right? And then the question is like, oh, well, what kind of magazine do I read, right? And then it was like, oh, and then John was like, here. And it's like, oh, they're travel magazines. And he's like, I always thought I was a traveler. And it was like, yeah, of course she is. Like, that's literally how we meet her, like a wannabe traveler. So it was the little things about her too, of like just being open and not feeling like I had to like figure something out. It wasn't like, oh, I have to build a story and really like compact all of this with something. That to me is muscling it, and sometimes that's great, and sometimes that works. And some characters, that's who they are, and but I think sometimes when we muscle things, we miss other things. And she never struck me as someone who, like, she lives because she doesn't miss something. She's so present. And so the building of this character, I think a lot of it was John Lee, but I think he made me feel like a lot of it was me too. And I think that's talent.
Yeah. And how did that sense of gentleness really transcend and carry over once you were then shooting scenes with him, and in the way that he would direct you in the moment, the way that he would have conversations with you as you were trying to figure out the different directions and the different choices that you could make together?
everything was like, well, how about this? Or how about that? Or maybe, do you want to try this? Do you want to, how about this? How about that? It all was so effortless, and also just watching him work with people, and not you know, like, not with Rami and whatever, but just with like, there was a truck driver in the beginning, and just to see how he spoke to everybody, and just, he never made you feel, or me, he never made me feel like there was ever a wrong choice or a bad choice, or that I, you know, that you, I always have the fear of like, oh, maybe I'll do something wrong, right? And I'm working on it in my like growth as a human being, but he never made it feel like anything was wrong, and that it was always a very safe space to explore and to, you know, to curl up and sit and be, and how are you in a police state, you know, and all of these elements alive. And it was all just suggestion. It was gentle suggestions that sparked the imagination and allowed for something more to happen. And I think that was what this experience has reminded me in my life, is that if you're open and you are receptive and you are present and you are gentle with yourself, a lot can be done, and it doesn't feel laborious. It's exciting. And so with him, the suggestions, and well, how about this, and maybe this, and I think this, and what do you think? The collaboration, and the magic of him as a director to sort of suggest, and how about this, and how about that, and then, like, as I was saying, to watch him with other actors, the same gentle, and watching him make you feel good, you know, like a director that you like. I was giddy coming home after shoot days, like that sequence outside, which was really interesting, is it was like the first day of shooting for the movie and also the last day. It was done in 2 nights, and they were on tail ends of the movie, of like the shooting schedule. So that song bit actually was shot on the last day, and all the running through the woods or the desert was shot on the first day. But I would go home giddy. Like, he just made me feel like it was a great day, and the work was great, and I felt great, and I was excited about it, and not like driving home 40 miles from Santa Clarita thinking, oh God, I wish I blah, blah. None of that. It was like, yay, it was great. I'm so happy. And like, whatever, like, that's what I hunger for.
Yeah, no, it's so beautiful to hear that that was the experience that you had. And thank you so much for making time to share all of this with us.
Oh my goodness, thank you. It's so nice to talk about an experience that like meant a lot and mattered, and to especially, you know, with like traumatic events and this character, like there's stories that are told, and the questions are sometimes scarier than the answers, and the lack of closure is scary. It's so nice to talk about it, and to talk about an experience that was so phenomenal, and just to work with phenomenal people was really lovely. So thank you for letting me share my experience.